Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments, a podcast sharing, exploring, and celebrating stories of change through mindset and wellness and their impact on relationships, both to ourselves and others. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Siria Gutierrez, along with my co-host, Melissa Robena. On this episode, we discuss forgiveness, what it means to us, and, at least for Melissa, how forgiveness has allowed her to connect with her father. Forgiveness. Why forgiveness?
I felt that this was a really important topic because it was something that is kind of close to my heart, something that I've been personally working on. And I just feel forgiveness is so important to discuss because I was always under the notion that it's like if I forgive someone, it's like I'm condoning their behavior or what they did or said to me, but that's really not the case.
No, I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about forgiveness or talking to anybody about it.
Now, I know that in previous episodes, you kind of shed a little bit light into your childhood, and there are probably a lot of acts or words spoken that probably would require or prompt or warrant forgiveness. Have you ever extended forgiveness to the parties involved?
No, and the reason really has more to do with I think words are bullshit. And I'm going to see what your actions actually show. And the crazy part is that I'm totally like a words of affirmation person, love languages, if you guys have read into all of that. So please tell me I'm pretty all the time. Like I want to hear that. Like my head wants to hear it. But when it comes to, oh, I won't do that again, or, oh, yeah, sorry. Like, I hate that. I hate empty apologies of just, oh, yeah, sorry, I messed up. No, show me you're going to do better. Show me you're going to do better. And it's the same thing with any kind of forgiveness. You can tell me, that you want forgiveness or that you're so sorry. I'm going to change my ways. And until I actually see you do it, I think you're full of shit.
So it's not necessarily that you wouldn't extend forgiveness to your mother or your father. It's more because the actions or the behavior hasn't changed.
Right. So don't sit there and, for example, my dad and I got into, and I talked about it before on the podcast, that day that he made me cry at the counter when I was shopping for Christmas. After that happened, I didn't talk to him for a year. And he was really upset, especially when like Father's Day came, and I'm the only one who does anything. And crickets, nothing. His birthday came, crickets. I didn't do anything. And then Thanksgiving came. I was at Matt's house. So it was like, okay, I was saved. But then Christmas was coming around and my mom was like, okay, I think you've punished him enough. And he keeps saying he already apologized. It's like, who did he apologize to? So he says he left you a voicemail. A voicemail? Like, you think that just because you can say I'm sorry and leave it on my voicemail, which I hate, by the way, don't leave me a voicemail. Fucking, can we turn that shit off? Anyways.
Text me, bro.
Even then, your text apology is not going to work. But it was a full year, and it wasn't even that I was trying to forgive or punish. It was just, I don't need this in my life. And you felt that there was something lacking because I wasn't engaging. And so finally, for the holiday, we made up or whatever. And for me, it was more of, okay, well, I want your actions to actually match. If you're really sorry, don't pull that shit again.
Do you feel that because there was not necessarily like a formal apology, but because you weren't able to extend that forgiveness, even just for yourself, do you feel not cheated in any way, but how does that make you feel? Are you able to move on without necessarily providing closure to this?
Well, I think what's interesting is what you're touching on, and kind of what's coming up right now is what the research that I did, very little on this one because there just wasn't a whole lot for me to find, was that forgiveness is a release of anger and resentment. And so even as I'm talking about it right now, yeah, you know what? I was fucking pissed. That was some BS. And every single time I feel like somebody's actions aren't matching their words, it irritates me. And so it starts building resentment or anger, depending on which one it is. And so just kind of knowing, okay, the forgiveness would be me releasing those things. So yeah, I could probably release it, but going back to what you were saying, I don't want to condone anybody's behavior. I want people to do better, and I believe people can do better. And so I don't necessarily get into the practice of let me forgive everything, because I don't see it. It's almost like I don't see it's worthy of forgiveness. It's just more of it's bullshit. I want to see that you've actually done something, and then that you've changed and that you've learned, those kinds of things. And if you don't do it, well, then when you tell me, I'm sorry, I've changed, please forgive me, I'm not going to believe it. It's no longer an honest thing, and you no longer have credibility in my eyes.
No, I agree with you. And I think the reason why I had like this negative connotation to forgiveness is because my father and I were estranged for several years. I mean, he kicked me out at the age of 15. We didn't talk. My abuelita, his mother, my grandmother would always talk to me about like, you need to forgive your father. And I'm thinking, based on, the emotional, mental abuse and the physical abuse that his girlfriend did or exhibited in that house, I was like, why am I forgiving him? It's not, I didn't even get a phone call or a voicemail message. It was just like, why am I extending this to him to make him feel better? Well, shit, like I don't feel better. Mm-hmm. And so, but I realized, like, how old am I? Like 20 years later, that it's not for the other person's benefit. I realize forgiveness is like an act of kindness for myself. Because you're right. By holding on to that, I'm reliving that pain. Mm-hmm. And as I'm reliving it, it hinders me from progressing or like advancing, because I'm starting to get angry. And that angerness turns to bitterness, which turns into resentment. And it just creates this barrier.
Sounds like you're going to the dark side of the force.
Oh my God. I lived there for the longest time, right? And I know that we've mentioned this several times on the pod, but I have daddy issues, right? And
just a little bit.
Just the two of us. Tiny little bit. Deal. But those issues though, him kicking me out, I had huge abandonment issues. I had this overall need for acceptance and approval. I sought out, terrible relationships growing up. And I had this desire to overachieve. Like, Daddy, look at me. Like, look what I achieved. Like, aren't you proud of me? Aren't you proud of me, Dad? Look at me.
Won't you love me now?
Will you love me now? Will you stay now? And these issues permeated themselves into all aspects of my life. And so to protect myself, I learned behavior that basically prevented me from truly connecting with other people. And so...
Well, have you forgiven him?
Yeah, I have.
How'd you go about it?
It was actually through conversation. My father was the type, and he maybe still is, I don't know, but where if there's any sort of disagreement or he didn't like what you said, or maybe he was hurt, maybe a pride thing, he would leave. Or at least that's how I interpreted it. He would cut off the conversation. He would avoid phone calls. And, so I learned like I couldn't speak up for myself. And that was another reason why I felt like I muted my voice, because I'm like, well, if I speak up, Dad's going to leave again. Right. But it wasn't until like I really started practicing self-worth. And we talked about that in a previous episode about, how do I go about practicing self-worth? It wasn't until I realized like I'm a good person and I'm valuable, and I need to speak my truth to him. I need to let him know how his actions or inactions from protecting me from this step monster hurt me. But I also had to be open to looking at what my role was in that relationship. And I know that I was a child, but he also has feelings. And when I finally had the courage to have like not a come to Jesus moment, but like a talk with him, I had to be prepared that he might say things that hurt me, and I'm not saying that, I released the floodgate and every grievance that I ever had, I just let loose. No, you kind of have to sprinkle it little by little. Mm-hmm. I mean, otherwise that person would become defensive, which is natural. I mean, if roles were reversed and someone was like, Melissa, here are all the grievances you've ever done against me, I would become defensive. Not because I intended to, but it's just no one likes to hear bad things about themselves or how they might have hurt other people.
Or how they're failing, how they're not meeting expectations. Yeah, nobody likes that, but those hard conversations. And I mean, good for you for being able to have that with him. And it sounds like you had some resolution.
Some resolution. I mean, I think that there's still going to be some talks, but what was nice was I came to the realization that it's like, okay, I'm going to speak my truth. And if he decides to leave again, then you know what? That's on him. I'm the only one of my siblings that talks to him. So if he wants to burn this last bridge, then that's his decision. But what was nice though was like he was able to share grievances with me, and I could understand now, maybe just because I have a little bit more life experience, it gave me a little bit perspective, not condoning his behavior, but it gave me some perspective into what was going on in his life. And I was trying to think, okay, how might I react, or in that situation, wouldn't react the same way, but it was just nice because now I have a little bit more perspective now that I'm older.
So was it like a mutual forgiveness for acts that happened during that time period?
No, it was more of him apologizing for his indiscretions and grievances, and him saying, you know, like, I don't deserve like the love and grace you show me. But I have to tell you, after I had this conversation with him, the relationship, the dynamics between he and I changed, because I was very reserved in what I shared with him. Any conversation that he and I had, it was very superficial, and it wasn't really enriching for me. And I would kind of just like dread his call. I'm like, this doesn't serve me at all. But since then, now, you know, we're engaging in deeper conversations, longer conversations. I get excited now when I talk to him, and we actually are planning a vacation together in September. And so I have to say, I have not gone on a vacation with my father in over 20 years.
That's crazy to me.
Isn't it?
I was going to say amazing, but no, it's crazy to me.
Well, let's just see. You know, talk is cheap. So we'll see. Like, ask me in September if we've actually gone. But, you know, I'm going to hold the intention high that he is.
But what it sounds like, and you know, what kept coming to mind when you were talking about having this conversation with him, was that you were willing to be vulnerable in that space. And really, you know, that's all that Brene Brown talks about, right? Getting to vulnerability with people who matter, not with everybody. You don't need to be vulnerable with the mailman. You just need to be vulnerable with the people who matter in your life. And if you get there, then that's really where you get to that satisfaction and that whole living. And so now look at the relationship that you have with your dad. You're planning a vacation because you were willing to be vulnerable with him, and knowing what the risk was. The risk was daddy ain't ever coming back.
He went for that pack of cigarettes and never came back. No, what you say is absolutely true, because one of the things that I had mentioned, like in a counseling session, I was just like, God, I hate like the calls between him and I. They're so boring. They're so superficial. And my counselor, you know, again, I'm thinking I was almost playing the victim at this point, like what my daddy did to me and stuff like that. She's like, the reason why you don't have a deeper connection with your father is because of you. Like you have to understand like the role that you play.
What a mic drop.
Right? And she's like, why do you expect this man to be vulnerable to you if you are showing no vulnerability to him? And so that's when I was just like, it was like, right? And you're right. I took a leap of faith, and it could have been that he's just like, you know what, Mel, screw you. He didn't have to reciprocate, but he did. And it's worked out great since, but it was definitely terrifying leading up to it. But it was funny because as soon as like he was on the phone call, I'm like, fuck it. Like and you would think at this moment, it's like, oh, Mel, did you cry? I didn't cry at all. Like, I think maybe because I've had or replayed this conversation of what I would say to my dad, that it was just like, I was like in the zone, and it really didn't hit me of like the conversation I had with him until maybe like the next day. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe like I told my dad exactly how I felt, how I didn't feel wanted or safe in his house, and of all the horrible acts the step monster like inflicted upon not just me, but my siblings. I was like, I can't believe I was just so candid with him.
Wow.
I know. But I think
that's a lot of growth.
It is. But I also think on both sides too, because who's to say if I had this conversation 10, 15, 20 years ago, if my dad would have been receptive to it? He may not have been. So I think it's also coming back to what you have talked about before, which is emotional intelligence, being able to read the room, read a person. Because maybe now or that time wouldn't have been the time to have a conversation with my father. Maybe I would have waited, but maybe I felt subconsciously that we were both ready to have that conversation. Maybe I felt like he also wanted to connect on a deeper level, but maybe he was unable due to pride or whatever to extend that olive leaf. And I'm just the stronger person for allowing myself to do that first.
Was there an actual exchange during the conversation of, I forgive you, Dad, I forgive you, daughter, and then you guys like ugly cried and, hugged each other over the phone?
No, I could tell he was crying. Like I said, I was just, not that I was numb, but I just like had come to a point where it's like I was tired of feeling like crap by carrying this with me. And I did say that I forgave him later, but it's weird. Like, since having this like conversation with him, he will now ask me like questions, like almost like not revisiting it, but it's just like almost like clearing the air and getting into like deeper, meaningful conversations, which is weird when you haven't had that with your dad or your partner, your parent, whatever, in over 20 years.
Do you have, or have you had those kinds of conversations with your mom?
We're working on it. It's funny because like I had, worked so hard in my counseling sessions about thinking like all the problems that I have are because of my dad. But I realize now that there's also issues with my mother. But my mother, and I think it's also changes in me because now my parents are actually wanting to engage with me on a different level. Because I think before I was that caretaker, that parentified child where I was kind of helping my parents emotionally through their own shit, and I wasn't able to really be a child. That now they're like, like my mother, for example, she's like, Mel, like I can tell like there's something that you want to tell me. Now you have to understand, like I had just gone over to her house. She had just moved in. I think my husband was helping fix her garage door, and I was like going through the papers, like some random papers to help her with warranties of something. And so this question came out of the blue. Mm-hmm. And I've said, well, I'm sure I do, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'm a reflector. I need to collect my thoughts. You can't just spring a question like that on me. And stop shaking.
I'm laughing because it's totally true. Yeah. I'm like, here, let's go ahead and just do this thing. Like, let's just see what happens. And you're like, how dare you?
I didn't have time to process this. So I said, I'm sure that I do. I just, you need to give me some time to think about it. She's like, no, absolutely. She's like, because I can tell that there's something between like you and I that needs to be addressed. And she's like, you're my sweetest child, but you're also my most critical. And I can just tell that there's something there. And it's funny because it wasn't until after she said that, and like after I left her house, I was like, she's right. I feel it in my body, and I want there to be a good relationship between my mom and I, because my mom basically took me in after my dad kicked me out, right? So I have this alliance with my mom. Mm-hmm. But I was also, I guess I was just so in awe and so thankful for my mom that I really didn't see the faults or the cracks in the foundation between her relationship and mine until I've actually resolved the issues with my father.
And I'm really curious about that from a biological standpoint, because I really do think that as we grow, we do start to finally see our parents as parents, right? But there's got to be there's got to be something going on, and I don't know what that answer is, but I'm going to find out because I am really curious about it, of what is it in our biology that makes us just think that they're the world. I mean, I know part of it is survival, right? Like we are literally dependent on these people to feed us and to provide our basic necessities. But at some point, you can shower yourself, you can, microwave your own dinner, or, whatever. In my case, it was, I can heat up my own pizza, like mm-hmm. not a problem. But at some point, what happens? Is it just that we become more mature, that we're able to see them and then realize, hey, our parents were growing as much as we were growing at the same time?
I think it has to do with life experience, because now we have more things to pull and draw from, or we've gone through similar experiences that we're like, that makes sense. But I don't know if you do this. I do this. I'm thinking like, okay, I'm 35 right now, but it's like, at 35, my parents already had like 3 kids.
Oh, they were all the time.
And then so it's just like, I do that often. Mm-hmm. And it it provides just like a different perspective of like, God, like what would I do in their shoes?
Every birthday, especially every birthday when I hit the birthday that my mom had a kid, because my mom was a teen mom. So when I turned 17, I was like, I don't know how she did that. And then like, again, when she was 21, she had my other brother. I was like, 21, yeah, right. Like I can barely take care of myself.
I'm 35. I can barely take care of myself.
Yeah. At 23, when she had me, and I was like, you had 3 kids by now? And then even the following birthday was like, wait, at 24, you not only had 3 kids, you were in a new country and you only had one of your kids with you, like just all of those things. And so, and again, when I turned 32, same thing, by then 4 kids. And I look at that, and I think a lot of people do the same thing where you just kind of compare yourself to where you were, but my choices are so different and my life has been so different that there really is there's no comparison anymore. So I'm trying to be mindful about not doing that, because I have been so intentional and not making the same decisions.
I also think, and you and I both participate in counseling, but back then, and this happened, this came up for me in the Marisa Lupo episode, the divorce coach that we interviewed. And she uses social media to connect and like do coaching with moms who are in the process of divorce or are divorced and are trying to learn life after divorce and co-parenting. And it just brought me back to like, God, technology has, helped us in so many ways, but that wasn't available to our parents back then. There was no virtual coaching like I participate in now. There weren't any support groups, virtual support groups that people like my mother could participate in. And how different you and I are, even mentally, just because we engage in counseling that maybe wasn't available to our parents back then.
Yeah, I do think that there are benefits that we have for being in the time that we're at. And so that definitely has our life on a different trajectory than our parents. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting area that we could get into. But it was just kind of thinking about back to forgiveness. I don't know that I've actively forgiven people for their wrongdoings to me, but I do every now and then get like a nagging sensation of like, I really need to ask somebody for forgiveness. Like, do you ever get that?
No.
Mm-mm. Like, and I remember this one in particular. I remember
Oh, that's not true. I have.
You have? Okay. Well, we'll get into yours in here in just a minute. But I remember this from being kids, especially when, I deal with a lot of cases against the school district and have bullying cases and people getting attacked on campus and things like that. And so in those cases, I just kind of think, well, was I ever a bully? And I can only think of one instance where my best friend at the time, and we were in like 7th or 8th grade, she got into a fight with this other girl. And I can't remember what the fight was about for the life of me. But she was having a party, and this was like, I can't remember what sport I was attempting to play very poorly at the time. But so there was some party, end of season party thing going on. And they got into some fight, and my friend was like, well, I don't want to go to the party. So she was my best friend. I felt like I needed to pick sides. I was like, all right, here's the line in the sand. And we ended up deciding that it would be way more fun for us to go to like a Taco Bell down the street and not go to the actual party and, hang out like the two of us. And I think maybe one other person showed up. Well, the person who did show up that we were not expecting was this girl's mom. She showed up and was like, why aren't you guys at the party? And I was like grown ass adult, right? Like getting in like definitely middle school drama. And, that is like one instance where I'm like, were we being bullies in that instance? Like,
I don't think so.
Do I need to reach out to this girl and be like, hey, you know what? I know people weren't particularly nice to you. And she ended up going to a different high school. She didn't want to go to the same high school as the rest of us. And I'm wondering how much of that had to do with just, she got teased probably quite a bit. Like I never teased her for her, not filling out a bra or doing any of those things. But I know she was getting teased for that. But I do remember just that one instance of not not participating, not showing up, being like, yeah, we're protesting this. I can't even remember what it is, but here I am way more than 20 years later, right? Like
The fact that it's still lingering with you, maybe you should just reach out, and she'll probably be like, what are you even talking about?
What the fuck are you talking about? Well, then that's kind of the thing with forgiveness, right? It's like maybe it's sometimes you carry some guilt of something that you did and the other person doesn't even know or care.
I think you're right, though. There is a sense of guilt. So what I was going to share when you asked me that question, so I felt like the parent to my two youngest siblings because there was just chaos growing up.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely some forgiveness there. Go on.
So I am almost 12 years older than my youngest sibling, but my youngest sibling's like my child, Megan. If you listeners, if you remember, he's my brother. So it was like in episode 6 and 7. But I remember leaving to go away to college because I knew that if I stayed, it just wasn't healthy for me and I needed to get out. So I left. But I knew by leaving, I was basically making those two siblings vulnerable to the chaos that was going on because I felt like I was sheltering them. And I carried this guilt for years. It wasn't until recently that I took aside both of the two youngest siblings individually. And I said, I need to apologize. I've been carrying around this massive guilt because I felt like I just abandoned you, like I left you. And they're like, no, you did what you had to do. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, that was so freeing for me because I carried that with me for a very long time. I know these aren't my kids, but they felt like my kids, and I felt like I did them wrong.
And, I totally resonate with that because, I've talked about the ACE score before and the adverse childhood experiences test. And I was just curious. So I sent it to my little brother and he ended up with 1 point less than I did. And it was so upsetting to me. And I felt just so responsible because I scored an 8 out of 10, which translations, fucking shitty childhood. Okay. And he got a 7 out of 10. And I just kind of remember sinking down in my seat and being like, oh, I failed him. And so, when we're going back to this topic of forgiveness, I had to kind of, be my own therapist and get myself out of that I wasn't actually responsible for him, just like you weren't actually responsible for your parents, putting off your siblings onto you. They weren't your responsibility. And then I just reflected back. I was like, okay, of course he has a similar score than I do. We grew up in the same household. Mm-hmm. We grew up with the same people. They were at different stages in their life. And even though I thought I was more of a buffer, maybe I wasn't, but it wasn't my job to do that. And once I was able to really just think about that and let that part go, that was, I guess, forgiving myself of not being a better parent to him. It's like I was never meant to be his parent. I was meant to be his older sister.
There is one quote that I came across, and it's
it wouldn't be a Pivotal Moments episode without a quote from Melissa.
Thank you. If you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you.
Say that one more time.
If you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. See, this is why I bring it up. That's true. And what I was kind of like alluding to before, which was like how it, not forgiving can create all this like negative emotion in me and like the decisions I made that resulted from it. I really thought that I was doing myself a service, like by protecting myself. I'm going to create this wall and it's going to prevent people like from leaving me, from hurting me. Like I'm doing well. But what I later learned was I wasn't building a wall to keep people out. I was actually barricading myself in. And once I made that shift, or once I acknowledged that I was barricading myself and how alone I felt, like I decided that's when I needed to really start to extend forgiveness to other people, starting with my father. And it seems since I've done that, and it's still a work in progress because there's many things for.
Yeah. Are you on a forgiveness roadshow right
now?
No,
I'm not on the tour just yet.
Okay.
But it's definitely something that I'm trying to work on.
Well, I'm proud of you for doing that because I can tell you, I don't know that I will be attending that concert anytime soon. I just don't see it. I don't see it for myself. I feel like I have had moments where I've asked for things a little bit out of my comfort zone with my parents, and I don't quite get a response. And so I just don't know. I don't know that we're there yet. And I don't know that we'll ever be. So I just work on myself and do those things. I can have vulnerable conversations with a lot of people, with you, with Matt, with some other dear friends of mine. And I think that that's good for me. I don't know that I need that with my parents. I feel like you value family much more than I do. Like it's a much higher value for you. I do value family, but it's not, for me, family is the family I choose, and has always really been the family of the friends that I build around me and the people that I keep really close to me that I see on a regular basis. Because blood family for me has really just let me down. But you are doing good stuff, and I'm excited and proud of you. And I hope you don't have to make a stop for me for anything for forgiveness. If not, I just ask for like a clean slate right now. I'm sorry.
No.
And my actions will usually match. I try to.
We want to hear from you. What does forgiveness mean to you? Let us know in our private Facebook group, Pivotal Moments HQ. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.